All right, Shabbosai, good morning, a good night, everyone. Aschos Baruch Hashem, to be able to continue to learn together. Ashkayt Rabbi Richter for giving the shir over the first days of Yontiv. A great Zechos Baruch Hashem to be able to continue together with the Chevra. Can you do me a favor? Yeah, thank you, Chevra, thank you. I want to begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nisan, Said and Simehaken, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushels this month to show their Hakaras HaTov to Hashem, for all of his Nisim and Niflos. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu continue to bestow his Rachmanas upon us, redeem all of the hostages, bring Hatzlacha to our soldiers and Hatzlacha to all of Am Yisrael and to Eretz Yisrael, as well as Le'iloi Nishmas Yachmiel Buck's father, Martin Buck, Matel Ben Chaim Leib HaKohen Zichron Levracha. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Dovi Nina Elman, in honor of Uncle Paul. Uncle Paul, this is the longest running. Next to Yoni Frager's birthday, this has been the longest running sponsorship. Baruch Hashem, in honor of Uncle Paul, his dedication to the Daf inspires Dovi each and every day. Incredible. Amir Hashem, Uncle Paul, you should be zocheh to continue to inspire Meir Ve'esim Shanim Tovos. All right, with that, let us begin. A lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. A lot to do today. Today's daf is Nun Zayin. We are picking up 3 lines down from the top. Amar Rava. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rava, Amar Rav Chasa, Boy Rabbi Ami, Ona ein lahem bittul mekach yesh lahem o ein lahem. So both say here's the shaila. Remember again, we had a Mishnah on Nun Vav Amud Aleph that went on to Nun Vav Amud Beis. What did the Mishnah say? So just a quick recap of the Mishnah. And by the way, I can't contain myself a little bit. Shabbos and Sunday, we have some agarata. Yeah, believe it or not. Then of course we go into Ezu Neshech. So it's a little bit of calm before the storm. It's a beautiful storm. It's a magnificent, raging, spiritual storm. And I would say, but again, I looked ahead a little bit, very excited for the upcoming dapim. So the Mishnah says as follows. Remember again, we had the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Elu dvarim she'en lahen onah. The Mishnah went through a list of things that are not subject to the halachos of onah. Amongst those things, avadim, purchases of servants, shtaros, documents, karkaos, real estate purchases, and hekdish. So we'll see, here's the Gemara's shayla. So Rava asks like this: when we say that there's no onah, so we'll say, remember, typically when we say onah, what does onah mean? Ona means overcharging by a sixth. So remember, again, say, in the world of overcharging, we had 3 different cases. Under a sixth, what's the halacha with under a sixth? Pachos mishsos, mechila. There's nothing even to talk about. There's no discussion, right? Over a sixth, remember again, the transaction is voidable by either party. And when we speak about ona is a sixth. What happens when you overcharge by a sixth? What's the halacha then? The halacha is you have to return the overcharge amount, but the transaction stands. Remember, that's a machlokes. I'm talking how we pass on halacha l'maisa. So transaction stands, you return the overcharge. So we'll say, so now Rav is asking the following shayla. When we say that there's ein ona, let's say by hekdish, that there's no ona, by hekdish. So we'll say, so does that mean, what about bittul mekach? So bittul mekach is over a sixth. So we say that by hekdish there's no ona. So if Beis HaMikdash oversold something by a sixth, there's no ona. What happens if, let's say, a transaction occurred and there's more than a sixth of overcharging or undercharging? Does that concept apply to hekdish situations? So ona in ma'im bittul mekach yesh lahen o ein lahen. Okay, the Gemara says as follows. That's the shayla. Amar Rav Nachman, Hada Amar Rav Chasa, Pashet Rabbi Ami, Ona ein lahem bittul mekach yesh lahem. So we'll see, interestingly enough, so the Gemara suggests over here that Rabbi Ami said, even though there is no ona by hekdish situations, and by the way, I'm using hekdish, but it's everything listed in the Mishnah, even though there is no ona, there is bittul mekach. There is bittul mekach. We'll say, take a look at Rashi. Actually, no, let's go weiter. So Rabbi Yonah says, ahegdeshos. So we'll say, now listen to this. So now so there's a lot of things happening over here. First shayla of the day is there bittul mekach? If you go ahead and you overcharge or undercharge by more than a sixth, does that impact any of the ona exempt transactions? So Rabbi Ami suggests that although they are now subject to ona, they are subject to bittul mekach. Okay. Now we put a period there. Now I will say the Gemara introduces a new conversation, but it's going to loop back to the previous conversations. The Gemara says as follows. Rabbi Yonah Amar ahekdeshos, Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar akarkaos, v'tarvayu mishmid Rabbi Yochanan Amru, ona ein lahem Bittul mekach yesh lahem. Suppose now listen to this. We have Rabbi Yonah, the Gemara says, is talking about hekdeshos, hekdesh transactions. Rabbi Yirmiyah is talking about karka, real estate transactions. And both of them say in their respective cases that there is no ona, but there is bittul mekach. Okay, which again I will say just to clarify our terms, which means that one opinion is saying by hekdesh, one opinion is saying by karka. If halacha l'maisa again you overcharge or undercharge by a sixth, there's no ona. But if you overcharge or undercharge by more than a sixth, ultimately these transactions are voidable. One is attributing this statement to hekdesh, and one is attributing this statement to karka, to real estate. And I both say both are going ahead and making their comments in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, now what Rabbi Yochanan said, we'll have to come back to in just a little bit. So here we go. So the opinion that says that bittul mekach applies to hektish, kol shekina karkos. All the more so, ultimately again agrees that bittul mekach applies to karka. However, man damar karkos, but the one who says that bittul mekach applies to karka, aval hekdeshos lo, but will not necessarily agree that bittul mekach applies to hekdesh. So the Gemara says, Kiddush Shmuel. Now we'll say, now why is that? Because listen to this, there's the opinion of Shmuel. It's actually quite fascinating. Shmuel says like this, Dummer Shmuel, hekdesh shave mana, shechidlu al shave pruta, mechula. So Shmuel says like this. We'll say that if you have a hekdesh item, you have a kodesh item that is worth a mana, and you deconsecrate it onto a pruta, what's the halacha? It's mechula, it's deconsecrated. Now we'll say, now what do you see from there? You see from there that in the realm of deconsecration, you could deconsecrate items with dissimilar values. So here the item itself is worth a money, you're deconsecrating it onto a pruta. So once that happens, so Mechula tells me that therefore it's deconsecrated, which tells you that valuations in general with hektish kind of follow a different type of paradigm. And therefore along those same lines, there's no bittul mekach, as well. So Tzanan Hasam, Im Haya Kodesh Balmum Yotza L'chulin V'tzarach Lasos Lo Damim. You have to we learned. Listen to this. Let's say you have an animal. Let's say you have a consecrated animal that is a balmum. So what's the halacha? The halacha is that it goes out to chulin, right? It becomes deconsecrated. However, tzarech lasos lo damim. But you have to settle up the accounting with the Beis Hamikdash. What does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Tzarech lasos imhaya kodesh balmum. Both say it's before the lines get wide, about 8 lines up. So listen to this. Reisha demasnisin hachi haomer hare zu tachas zu. So the Gemara says, Tmuras zu chalife zu, harizit tmura zu mechuleles al zu, lo amar klum, she'in karben tamim mischalel. V'im haya kodesh balmum, yatza l'chulin, v'tzarech lasos lo damis. We'll say now, watch this. Without getting into all the technicalities of tmura over here, what the Gemara suggests is like this. If you have a consecrated animal, and it's a balmum, and you go ahead and you decide to exchange a non-blemished animal for the blemished animal, it works. Right, it works, and halacha l'maisa again, the non-blemished animal becomes deconsecrated. However, v'tzarech lasos lo damim im ein zu shel chulin yafek shel hekdish mosif alema osav ad kedei dmei hekdish. So we'll say, watch the following case. So let's say animal A, which is a balmum. So now you go ahead and you say animal B should be instead of animal A. So first of all, interestingly enough, it works. What happens if animal B is not as valuable as animal A? So the halacha is you have to make up that difference in value to the Beis Hamikdash. That's the halacha. L'tzarech lasos lo damim. Rabbi Yochanan says like this: Yatza l'chulin divar Torah, v'tzarech lasos lo damim midivreihem. So Rabbi says, so now here's what's interesting. So we have a statement, right? The statement of the Mishnah is, so we'll say, let's go with the case. I consecrated an animal. The animal becomes a balmum. As a balmum, as a blemished animal, obviously it cannot be offered up. It cannot be offered up. So now what do? I go ahead and I make an exchange. I say animal B should be instead of animal A. So halacha l'maisa, number one, it works. Animal B is now offered. Where does this become complicated? If there's a difference in value between A and B. So let's assume for a moment B is worth less than A. Then what's the halacha? You have to make up the difference. That's the statement in the Mishnah. Now we're going to see an interesting machlokes. So Rabbi Yochanan, Yotza l'chulin dvar Torah v'tzarech lasos lo damim midivreim. So Rabbi Yochanan says, here are the mechanics. Midaraisa, animal A becomes totally deconsecrated. And really, animal B fills its place. And mid'oraisa, there is no need to make up the financial difference, the value difference between A and B. Midrabanan, Chazal came along and said, you should make up the financial difference. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, first white line in Rashi, Yatsa l'chulin dvar Torah, va'afilo ein zu yafa kimose ki da'amar da'amit me'ona. So we'll say, so according to Rabbi Yochanan, and they will say, this just, we're kind of circling back. Beforehand we said that Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yirmiyah were both making statements that according to Rabbi Yochanan. Here's the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan says that Aloha Lamaisa, Midaraisa, the exchange works, and even if B is worth less than A, you're good to go. You're good to go. Midirabanan, we want you to make up the difference. Reish Lakish says no. Af tzarech lasos lo damim min haTorah. Reish Lakish says no. There is a biblical obligation to go ahead and settle up the difference, even midoraisa. Take a look at Rashi. Second white line in Rashi. Af tzarech lasos lo damim dvar Torah. The gabi hekdeshos erkecha ksiv bekulu. The kasavar erkecha shavyav mashma. Rabbi Yochanan savar erkecha kol dam misherchu mashma im zolim yakar. So we'll say it happens. Rashi points out over here that it's machlokes in drush of psukim. So we're not going to involve ourselves too much in the drush of psukim right now. Right now, here's what you have to know. So again, I substitute B for A. I will say, just to point out, this is a permitted case of substitution, right? Normally, again, Tamura, you're not allowed to do. This is permitted, right? Why is this permitted? Because animal A is blemished. So therefore, B is going to come instead of A. Difference, right? B is worth less than A. Rabbi Yochanan says, Midaraisi, you're good to go. Midrabanan, you should pay the difference to the Beis HaMikdash. Reish Lakish, no, even Midaraisa, you have to pay the difference to the Beis HaMikdash. Okay. So the Gemara says, Maya Skinon. What's the case? So we'll say, I just want to point out, here's what's interesting. Both according to Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, it's actually interesting, like, when you look at this situation externally, it's going to look the same, right? Why? Because both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are telling you, what do you have to do? What do you have to do? You have to pay the difference in value between B and A. You do have to do it. Just the difference is, why do you have to do it? Rabbi Yochanan is saying you only have to do it midrabanan, and Reish Lakish is saying you have to do it d'oraisa. Okay, now we'll say, here we loop back to our screen. Now remember again, what's our question? Just so we keep our eye on the ball over, what's our question? Our question is, we established in the Mishnah that hekdish is not subject to onah. So I'll say, so just to give you a very simple example like this, right? I go ahead and I redeem something from the Beis HaMikdash, and it turns out that I redeemed it for more than 1/6 of its value. What's talacha? No ona. So what are we trying to figure out over here? There's no ona by hekdish, but is there bittul mekach? So let's say my transaction with the Beis HaMikdash was, again, either over more than 1/6, overvalued or undervalued. Does that allow for the voiding of the transaction? That's our shaila over here. So watch this. It says the Gemara. Here we go. This is very exciting. Mayaskinun. What's the case? So I'll say, if we're talking about over here a case of where, now what we're trying to figure out is the difference in the value between B and A. So if we're talking about the amount of ona, i.e. 1/6, so Bahal Leimer Reish Lakish Tzarech Lasos Lo Damim Dvar Torah. So I don't understand. So Reish Lakish is saying that if let's say there's a difference between, let's say there's the difference between B and A is B is worth exactly 1/6 less than A. Okay, let's assume for a moment. So we'll say, so what is 1/6? What is 1/6? What is 1/6? That's ona. So we'll say, so now you're going to tell me Reish Lakish is saying that mid-d'oraisa, I'm obligated to make up that 1/6 to the Beis HaMikdash? That can't be. Why not? So we'll say, what is that 1/6 called? What is that called? What is that called? It's called ona. We'll say, by the way, whenever I ask you a question and you don't know the answer for the next couple of days, you can always just blurt out ona, and you're going to be right. You're going to be right, right? So again, I want to say, that's right. So if it's exactly 1/6, what is that? Let's try this again. Exactly 1/6, what is that called? Wow, incredible, fantastic, good. So let's say, so Lemaisa again, so Reish Lakish can't be saying that midaraisa, I have to pay that difference. V'hatnan, Eile dvarim she'en lenona, hakarkos, v'avodim, v'ashtaros, v'ekdeshos. So we'll say, it can't be 1/6, right? Because 1/6, again, remember I will say, if animal B was worth exactly 1/6 less than animal A, it can't be that Reish Lakish is saying that midoraisa, I have to pay that difference because that difference is ona. And everyone agrees that ona does not apply to hektish. That's the Mishnah. So what's the case? Ella bittel mekach. Oh, okay. So rather it must say what's the case? It must say the case is like this. Animal B is more than a sixth less than animal A. That's the case. More than a sixth. What we call both say bittul mekach. In other words, more than a sixth is the threshold where either party could go ahead and void the transaction. So let's see, the case in question is, again, one more time. I was makdish animal A, ready to offer it up as a carbon. It develops a mum. I exchange it for animal B, and it turns out that animal B is is more than 1/6 less the value of animal A. Okay, now both say now this is beginning to make a little bit of sense. So what does Reish Lakish say? Reish Lakish says that halacha l'maisa, I am biblically obligated to make up that difference to the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because Reish Lakish will say like this: even though ona'ah doesn't apply to the Beis Hamikdash, doesn't apply to Hektish, but what? Bittul Mekach does. So therefore, again, add a sixth, add once. In other words, so technically speaking, I will say, if animal B was exactly a sixth less than the value of animal A, then what will be the halacha? I wouldn't be obligated to do anything. But it must be the case in question is animal B is more than a sixth less than the value of animal A. That's bittul mekach. And Reish Lakish therefore says only ona doesn't apply to hektish. Bittul mekach, more than a sixth, does apply to the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore I am obligated to make up the difference. Incredible. Well, here's what's interesting. So Gemara says, Shabbos says, interesting. So yet, even in this case, Rabbi Yochanan is saying that midrabanan, you also have to make up the more than a sixth, which is interesting. Right, so Rabbi Yochanan is agreeing. Although Rabbi Yochanan disagrees, he says it's not a biblical obligation, but he says midrabanan, you have to. But here's what's interesting: Vam Rabbi Yochanan, Agdeshos, Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Akarkos, Vitar Vayu Mishmeid Rabbi Yochanan Amri. Ona ein lahem bittul mekach yesh lahem. Yet Rabbi say beforehand. Again, remember we had Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yochanan. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yonah and. Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yosai, who were both aligning themselves with the positions of Rabbi Yochanan, and both agreed that halacha l'maisa, there is no ona, but there is bittul mekach. And I will say, at least according to Rabbi Yonah was aligning that shita with hektish. So according to Rabbi Yonah's interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan was agreeing that bittul mekach does apply to hektish, right? I should say doesn't apply to hektish. Or does apply to hektish, meaning that you would have to pay ultimately by hektish. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, "Oh no, ein lahem bittul mekach yesh lahem." So we'll say the point the Gemara is making over here is we just set this up as saying that Reish Lakish holds that bittul mekach would apply to hektish, and Rabbi Yochanan says that it doesn't. Right? That's why Rabbi Yochanan is saying that ultimately you only have to make up the difference midrabanan but not midaraisa. But yet, we have this opinion of Rabbi Yonah who says that even according to Rabbi Yochanan, if the value of animal number 2 is more than a sixth less than the value of animal number 1, you would have to make that up midaraisa. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, the olam bebitul mekach. In reality, we are talking about a case where the value of animal A is more than 1/6 the value of, I should say differently, animal B is worth more than 1/6 less than animal A. So therefore, again, we're in the realm over here of bittul mekach, right? So above ona, and I will say, what do you do? Ve'epoch to Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, ud Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. And I will say, the truth is, switch around the shitos. If you just go ahead and switch around the attributions, so then ultimately, again, you have Rabbi Yochanan saying that what? Rabbi Yochanan will then be saying that halacha l'maisa, there is bittul mekach midaraisa. So therefore, again, you have Rabbi Yochanan ultimately saying that halacha l'maisa, if animal B is more than 1/6 less the value of animal A, then there is a biblical obligation to make up that difference to the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because even though ona'ah doesn't apply to the Beis Hamikdash, ultimately bittul mekach does. Okay, so the Gemara says, "But my kamiflagi." So what are they arguing about? But the Shmuel. So both say they're arguing on Shmuel. And both say, and I remember again, what did Shmuel say? Shmuel said above is actually very interesting. He said, if you have hekdish, a consecrated item that's worth a mana, and you consecrate it onto a pruta, that the deconsecration ultimately works. So the Gemara is suggesting that the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is rooted in Shmuel. How so? Damar Shmuel, hekdish shave mana shechilalu al shave pruta. That if halacha l'maisa, again, you have hektish that is worth a mana, and you deconsecrate it ultimately on a pruta, mechulal, that it is deconsecrated. Mar islay the Shmuel, umar leslay the Shmuel. One opinion holds of Shmuel, and one opinion doesn't hold of Shmuel. Now, both say, if you take a quick look at Rashi, you see the Rashi efoch. Actually, you see Tosfos umar savar. See that Tosfos mar savar? Yeah, and left hand. If you take your finger, put your index finger, etzba elokim, right? Take your, and you go ahead and you move it rightward. You'll see in the middle of Rashi there's a period over there, and it says v'kamiflagi. Just pick up over there. V'kamiflagi Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan man da'amar ein lahem bittul mekach islay de Shmuel v'cheivan de'im it me'ona loshna shus v'loshna yoser mishasus dilagabe hedyot aminan ta aval behekdish leka l'meimar tos. Read the next Rashi. Mar leslay de Shmuel kasav v'cheivan de'ika yoser mishasus lav derach mekachu v'cheivan dilagabe mekach lav midi gabe chil namis. Okay, so that is outside. So let me say again, the Gemara suggesting is like this. Remember, we've done two things over here. Number one, we've reversed the positions of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan is, so what is everyone agreeing on? Let's go. Let's always start with what everybody agrees with. What does everybody agree with? Number one, there is no ona by hekdish. That's what everybody is agreeing with. What's the machlokes? The machlokes is bittul mekach. More than a sixth. Does that concept of avoiding the transaction apply to hekdish or not? So now what we're suggesting is, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the answer is no. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the answer is yes. There is bittul mekach by hekdish. According to Reish Lakish, the answer is no. And it turns out that the root of their machlokes is Shmuel. One opinion holds like Shmuel, one opinion doesn't hold like Shmuel. Okay, the other possibility is no. The kuli alma is the Shmuel. Everyone agrees with Shmuel. So we'll say, what are they arguing about? Mar savar shechilalo in lechatchilalo. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, here's the machlokes. One opinion holds. Now remember again, Shmuel's case is where you're taking hekdish that is worth a money, and you are deconsecrating it, obviously, on something that is worth much less. In this case, a pruta. So we'll say, so the shaila now becomes, how do you read Shmuel's words? One says, Mar savar shechilalo in lechatchilalo. We're talking about a case of ex post facto. You shouldn't do this lechatchila. You should not deconsecrate something that's worth a mana, something that's worth a pruta. If you did it, it works. But lechatchila, you shouldn't do it. Umar savar afi lechatchila. The other opinion says, no, even lechatchila, you are permitted to go out and do this. The other possibility is, the olam bichdeona. In reality, maybe we're talking about, again, that the case is talking about a sixth, and not more than a sixth, v'lo sepoch, and therefore do not reverse the shitas of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Okay, so now we'll say a little bit of 180. Ubud Rav Chisda, and they're arguing Rav Chisda. What does Rav Chisda say? Rav Chisda kamiflagi da'amar my ein lahem ona. And we'll say, what does it mean when we say that hekdish is not subject to ona? Einon bitoras ona. Okay, we'll say, here we go. When we say, when the Mishnah says that, for example, there is no ona by hekdish, what does that mean? So now, the Gemara is suggesting that what it means is that they are not subject to the entire framework of ona. Meaning what? Amud Beis. Ta'afilu pachos mikidei ona chozer. Wow. Okay, I will say. So now, we've just done something very dramatic, right? So let's just point out kind of where we started, right? Where do we start? Like, I have absolutely no idea. I don't know where we are, what we're doing, or where we started, where we're ending. Okay, so I'll tell you. Where do we start? We started in the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah told us that, let's just focus on hekdish for now, that hekdish is not subject to the laws of ona. So we'll say, what do I know from that statement? What I know from that statement is that if in hekdish there is a fluctuation of a sixth, it doesn't negate the transaction, right? And the transaction stands. There's no returning of the money. We started out in today's daf trying to figure out, okay, what happens if halacha l'maisa, there is an overcharge or an undercharge by more than a sixth? We call that bittul mekach. Shabbos say sounded like there was a machlokes of Yochanan and Reish Lakish about whether or not Bittul Mekach applies Midoraisa or Midrabanan. Now, interestingly enough, but this entire time, we've been assuming that what? What happens if in a hektish transaction, there's ultimately, again, an overvaluation or undervaluation by under a sixth? We've been assuming the entire time that what? Nothing to talk about. Okay, so we'll say, so now comes along Rav Chisda, and Rav Chisda says like this: when we say that in the Mishnah that hektish is not subject to onah, it means Rabbi say that hektish is totally pulled out of the concept of onah altogether, which means what? Afilu pachos mikdei onah choser. Rabbi say what that means is like this: if when it comes to a hektish transaction, if hektish in any way gets the short end of the straw, even by what? Less than a sixth? Ultimately, again, the house always wins, right? And hektish, right? And that undercharge or overcharge that adversely impacts hektish is always returned. So I'll say this is a totally different understanding. So therefore, again, it goes without saying that if it's a sixth, it's going to be returned to the mikdash. And it goes without saying that if it's over a sixth, it's going to get returned or voided for the mikdash. In other words, at a sixth or over a sixth, the Beis HaMikdash never is shortchanged. The Chiddush over here is even under a sixth. Means under normal circumstances, if in normal business, normal transactional law, there's an undercharge and overcharge by less than a sixth, we always assume that, what do we call that? Mechila. Not by the Mikdash. Not by the Mikdash, I will say. By the Mikdash, again, any variation in actual value, even less than a sixth, goes back to the Beis HaMikdash. Rashi says over here, "Tafilu pachos mikdei ona chozer." So we'll say a dramatically different understanding of this phrase. So Gemara says, "Meisvei." One second, hold up. Meisvei ribis va'ona lehedjot vein ribis va'ona lehekdish. So let's listen to this. There is a prohibition of ribis of interest, charging interest, and ona, and overcharging in normal in regular transactions, vein ribis v'ona lehekdish. But ultimately, again, there is no interest and there is no ona by hekdish transactions. Okay, the Gemara says, so what does this mean? So the Gemara says, mi alima mimas nisin. So we'll say, so first of all, what do you do with that statement? That's a Bryce, right? The Bryce says there is no hekdish and there is no ona. Right, I'm sorry. Ribis va'ona lehedjot vein ribis va'ona lehekdish. So miya olima mimas nisin. So we'll say. So again, that makes it sound like the laws of onad so don't apply to hekdish. Don't apply the laws of ribis and onad don't apply to hekdish. Miya olima mimas nisin do kimna betaras onad. So the Gemara says, I don't understand how is this any stronger than the Mishnah, where we've established it in the laws of Ona. Hachinami ribis v'din Ona lehedjot ve'ein ribis v'din Ona lehekdish. Rather, I will say, what do we mean to say? It's like this. Rather, we mean to say that halacha l'maisa. So the Gemara says, "Hachanami ribis v'din ona lehedjot vein ribis v'din ona lehekdish." There is ribis and din ona for hedjot, but there is no ribis and din ona lehekdish. Ihachi, if that's the case, hainu diktani seifa. Look at the seifa. Ze chomer behedjot mi behekdish. So I'll say, so what do you do with the seifa? The seifa says this is a chumrah that hedjot has over hekdish. So I will say, which makes it sound like what? That ona doesn't apply. That ona doesn't apply to hekdish. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe a ribis. Maybe what that means is interest. What it means is interest applies to hedjot, but doesn't apply to hekdish. But maybe ona applies to both. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, lisni nami ze chomer behekdish mi behedjot. Ona. Let it go ahead and say that this is a chomer that hekdish has over hedjot, in that hekdish is subject to ona. Or it's not subject to ona, while hedjot is. To which the Gemara says, Hachi hashta bishlama ze chomer behedjot mi behekdish v'sulo. So here's the difference. You can make this statement that this is a chomer that hedjot has over hekdish, because this might be the only area where this is true. Ela hekdish ze chomer v'sulo. The problem is you can't phrase it in the reverse, because it makes it sound like this is one of the only chumras that hekdish has over hedjot, and of course that is certainly not true. Hekdish has many chumras over hedjot. To which the Gemara says, ribis de hekdish hechidami. So Gemara says, by the way, what is the case of ribis? What does Gemara say? So again, just want to point out what we have kind of floating out here. What we have floating out here is two dramatically different interpretations as when the Mishnah says that the laws of Onah don't apply to Hekdish. What does that mean? So possibility number one, which was the possibility we were operating with up until we turned the page, was that literally, again, if there's an overcharge or an undercharge by more than this, by a sixth, halacha l'maisa, that does not void the transaction, or I should say, that money doesn't go back to the seller purchaser. Rather, it remains, the advantage remains with the Beis Hamikdash. Right? Again, less than a sixth is always going to be my mechila, and more than a sixth, bittul mekach, that was going to, sounded like what? It was subject to the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Now, dramatically different interpretation, which is, what does it mean that ein onah le'hekdeshos? What does it mean? That Allah the whole concept of onah doesn't apply, and even less than a sixth will go back to the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so just hold that. We still haven't resolved that yet. The Gemara will say it gets caught up on something else. The Brisa said there's no ribis for the Beis Hamikdash. Wow. There's no ribis for the Beis Hamikdash. So what's that case? No laws of interest. So the Gemara says, watch this. Ribis tehekdish hechidami. This is so interesting. Ilema the osve gizbar meya b'meya sorry. Ilema the osve gizbar meya b'meya ve'esrim. So now watch this. Let's say I have the following case. The temple treasurer is interested in making some money for the mikdash. So I'll say, what does he do? So the Gizbar comes over to him, he says, Silber, here's the deal, right? I'll lend you 100 zuz, pay back 120 to the Beis HaMikdash. So I'll say, so first of all, who wouldn't take that deal? Who wouldn't take that deal, right? To have the opportunity to mahana the Beis HaMikdash, sign me up. I'll take that in a moment. So I'll say, so Lamais again. So that's because the Gizbar comes along and says, so I'll say, by the way, you understand, of course, that's classic ribis, right? In other words, he says, I'll give you 100 zuz now, and give me back 120 in 2 weeks from now. Right? So that's ribis, right? If you and I would do that to each other, that would be a biblical prohibition both upon the lender and the borrower. Next parak in Hashem. So the Gemara says, here's the problem. V'halo ma'al ha'gizbar. Now understand, the way this works is as follows. In that case, the Gizbar himself committed me'ilah. Now why did he commit me'ilah? He has no right to start loaning out temple funds. Now granted, I want to point out, his intention is good. Right? What's his intention? Make money for the mikdash. That friend, right? Make money for the mikdash. So we'll say, make money for the mikdash. But he's not allowed to do that. Right? He doesn't have that right over Beis HaMikdash funds to lend it out with interest. Now, whenever you take temple property and do something you're not allowed to do with it, that's called me'ilah. So therefore, again, I will say, essentially, he's committed an act of me'ilah. Again, inadvertently. So gizbar. Now here's the chap. What happens when you do me'ilah? V'cheivan shemal hagizbar yatsu me'osav l'chulin v'havalu l'hedjot. Now here's what's interesting. What happens when you commit me'ilah? Essentially, what me'ilah does something very interesting. Me'ilah deconsecrates the item, makes it yours. Now you're obligated to what? What are you obligated to? Rabbi say, pay back plus a fifth. Remember again, we saw this yesterday, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, a year and a half ago, whenever it was, right? So as I said, again, right? So now, here's what's interesting. So when you take temple property illegally, it becomes yours, it becomes deconsecrated. So as such, when the Gizbar comes along and lends me money, 100 zuz, at a rate, right, at a 20% rate, I have to pay him back 120. So he's committed me'ilah. The money is his. He's effectively lending me his money. So we'll say, so therefore, that's not a case of Beis HaMikdash money, that's a case of me'ilah. Take a quick look at Rashi. Hachama askinan. Rashi says over here, Haydik Tani ein ribis lahekdish, lav b'halva kai, ela behedjot shekiba ma'os min al-lishka min ha-gizbar. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, not yet. So it says, therefore, again, what's the case? So remember, if it's just a pasha case of the Gizbar lending me money, right, gives me 100, you pay back 120, remember, we're looking for a case of ribis by the Beis HaMikdash. That wouldn't be a ribis by the Beis HaMikdash because the Gizbar committed me'ilah. Once he committed me'ilah, the money becomes his. So effectively, whose money is he lending me? Whose money is he lending me? His money. Now, obviously, now once it's his money, of course, this becomes an illegal ribis transaction. Okay. So what's the case? Well, this is actually fascinating. Here's the case. Here's the case of Ribis. So now watch this. Here's the case. I was awarded a Beis HaMikdash contract. So we'll say, remember again, the Beis HaMikdash, where did we see this? I feel like this might have been maybe in Mesechah Shkalim we saw this. Where's the Aleph? Shkalim Parak Dalet. Good. So we'll say, now watch this. So listen to this. The case over here is where the Beis HaMikdash would give out contracts, right? So, for example, I got a contract to supply fine flour, solas, right? Fine flour to the Beis HaMikdash. Now, both say, now the terms of my contract are, look at Rashi for just a moment. So, both say, now watch this. This would be incredible. I got the carbon mincha contract. I landed that contract. So Rabbi say, now what's my contract? So I provide the fine flour for the Kara Mincha. I am putting in a bid for that one, right? So I have no idea about flour, but I'm going to learn. I'm going to Google it. Right? So I get awarded the fine flour contract for the Kara Mincha. Now Rabbi say, now what does that mean? Now the terms of my contract are Arba Se'in Bisela. So the terms of my contract are I am going to provide fine flour to the Beis HaMikdash at a rate of 4 se'in, right? 4 sa per sela. That's the rate of my contract. Now, what happened? Back to the Gemara. Va'amdu mishalosh. Now, the problem is the price of flour went up, and you could only get 3 se'in for a sela. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Ultimately, again, I am obligated to go ahead and honor the contract. So we'll say, just finish up that Rashi. Rashi says, "V'hokru v'amdu mishal shlim b'sela tilu hedjot asra lifsok al peros ad sheyetzi ashar the kanlafi lo yotz ashar adayin la'arba poskin." So we'll say, we're going to actually see this in Ezu Neshech. You cannot enter into agreement like this with another person, because I will say again, the problem you get into over here is ribis. Because again, the prices fluctuate. Yet, interestingly enough, what the Beis HaMikdash has the ability to do is to lock in contracts. So now I got locked into a contract of 4 se'in for a sela. Let's read Sanya. This is so interesting. Hamakabel alav lesapek selasos me'arba. So we'll say, so I entered into a contract to sell again 4 sa'ah of flour for a sela. And what happens? Va'amdu mishalosh. And I will say, now the price of flour went up, and now you can only get 3 se'in for a sela. So again, flour went up. So what's the halacha? Va'amdu mishalosh misapek me'arba. So I'll say, so ultimately, again, I'm honored to honor the contract and provide 4 sa'ah per sela. What happens, Mishal Shabbos say, what happens if I contracted with the Beis HaMikdash? And ultimately, again, we locked in a rate of 3 se'in per sela, and then what happens? The price of flour went down. Va'amdu me'arba, misapek me'arba. Ultimately, again, I will say, so I go ahead and I now provide more flour. I provide 4 se'in at a sela. Why? Shiyat hekdish al ha'olyona. Ultimately, again, I will say, because again, the house always wins, right? The Beis HaMikdash always has the upper hand. So I will say, so here's a perfect case. This is what it means when the laws of Ribis don't apply to the Beis HaMikdash. So we're going to see, this is, if we were to do this with each other, this would be a classic Ribis scenario. But in the Beis HaMikdash, the laws of Ribis don't apply. Therefore, you can lock in these contracts. And I will say, again, whatever the fluctuation of valuation, it always goes to the benefit of the Beis HaMikdash. So again, if flour becomes more expensive, I have an obligation to go ahead and honor the original contract. If flour becomes less expensive, I have an obligation to go ahead and provide more flour at the rate that we locked in. Incredible. So it says that's what it means. There is no ribis for the Beis HaMikdash. Now the Gemara gives one more case. This is fascinating. Rapapa Amar, this is really incredible. Rapapa Amar Hacha be'avnei binyan hamasuros legizbar askinan. Rabbi say this is absolutely riveting. I will say, I just want to point out how privileged we are, right? It's Yom Tov of Pesach. This is a time of Aliyah L'Regel. So we don't yet have the ability to be Ola Regel with the Beis HaMikdash. And I will say, but again, the same way that each and every day we say Karbanos, right? Why do we say Karbanos? In the absence of the ability to bring karbanos, the next best thing is the ability to say the psukim. And when you say the psukim, it's a quasi-kiyum of offering up karbanos. So Rabbi say, if I can't be ola regel, the ability to talk about the Beis HaMikdash, the ability to learn about the Beis HaMikdash is a quasi-kiyum of aliyah l'regel. So Rabbi says, just have in mind that as we're learning these beautiful gemaras, it is as if we're actually walking in Emirat Hashem to the Bayish Lishi. Today we're doing it with our neshama, but Emirat Hashem we should be zocheh to do it with our guf b'hira b'yameinu. So I say, now watch this. This is so fascinating. Rav Papa says, I'm going to tell you the case of Ribbis. I'm going to tell you the case of Ribbis when it comes ultimately again to the Beis HaMikdash. What's the case? Watch this. The Beis HaMikdash bought stones, or I should say the Beis HaMikdash has stones that it's going to use for construction. The Gizbar is taking those stones and lending them out with interest. I don't know, whatever, you're having company, so you needed some extra tables or some extra seats, right? So you're borrowing the stones, you're paying a fee for it, and it's a heightened fee. That would be a case, ultimately, again, of interest. Now, what's the pshat with the stones? I don't understand. Isn't lending out stones the same issue of what? Of the Gizbar lending out money, which is Me'ilah. Once it's Me'ilah, it becomes, I will say, now watch this. Building materials, listen to this, the Gemara says are different. The Gemara says, Kidishmol Damar Shmuel, Bonin B'chol, the Achakach Makdishin. Okay, so we'll say, watch this. Watch this. The halacha is, let me tell you the bottom line halacha outside, then we'll see it inside. So we'll say, building materials were not consecrated until they were a fully finished product. Now, what's the pshat of that? Take a look at Rashi. Bonin b'chol, Rashi says, Kishein bonin binyane hekdish. I will say, whenever the Beis HaMikdash would be building something, so I will say, by the way, this is very shayach to know, because this has, again, it's a big machlokes, the Baishish, the third Beis HaMikdash. Is the third Beis HaMikdash coming down from Shamayim complete, or are we going to have to build it ourselves? Right? That's the machlokes. That's the machlokes, right? Coming down complete, or do we build it ourselves? So watch this. When you build a Beis HaMikdash, the Gemara says, Lo hayu konin ha'avarim va'atit mima'os hekdish k'dei shlo yavo umnin va'amli de me'ilah im yeshvu aleihem or im yenu mehem. So we'll say, listen to this. Listen to this. So we'll say, here's the issue. You don't want to consecrate building materials as you're building the Mikdash. Why? Because I will say, remember again, let's just imagine this in your mind. So the Beis HaMikdash, third Beis HaMikdash is being built. So the workers are putting down the stones. I will say, then what happens? It's coffee break, right? You need to have a coffee break a little bit, all right? So what do? They put their coffee cup on top of the stone. Or for that matter, again, the worker wants to rest for a moment. He just sits on the stone. If those stones are Kodesh, they're Me'ilah. They're Me'ilah. You know, sometimes I will say, or somebody comes by, they want to go ahead and have a l'chaim. Right? So, this happened, by the way, it's first day Yontiv. We had first day of working at our company. Chevra walked by with a bottle of arak. Just walking around the neighborhood with a bottle of arak. And it's Pesach, right? You see Yidden with arak, right? And so what do you do? What do you do if you see a Yid with arak on Pesach? There's no choice. You don't have a choice about it, right? So they came. So my son-in-law's car was parked in the driveway. So there was a bottle of arak with a whole bunch of cups on the car. First, I told my son-in-law, now you can claim the car as parsonage, right? You know, it's used, used for Klei Kodesh. So I'll say, so again, you didn't walk around and they make a l'chaim. So here, if the stones themselves were mukdash, right? If the stones were hekdish, you'd run into Me'ilah. So they do something very interesting. Bless you. So look at Rashi. So I'll say, watch this. The Beis HaMikdash, when it buys building materials, it buys everything on credit. It does not pay, because we'll say the problem is, if the Beis HaMikdash would purchase building materials, then what? Then they become Kodesh. So what do? This is so fascinating. They buy all of the materials on credit. Finish Rashi. Elochem ba'akafa, v'harein chol, ad sheyivnu b'choma, u'mishein benuyos b'choma, nostin ma'os hektish, v'lo chinosan, v'hu hekdeshan. So I'll say, now watch this. So therefore, only after the structures are built, then what? Then the Beis HaMikdash pays the money for the building materials. Once they pay the money for the building materials, then what? Everything becomes Kodesh. So we'll say, isn't this incredible? This is how they would build the Beis HaMikdash. We'll say it's absolutely fascinating. So again, all building materials bought on credit, no money's paid. This way, again, if anyone uses, right, the stones or anything else, there's no me'ilah. Only once it is totally built, then and only then do they pay for it. Similarly, again, finish Rashi. O emisnadev adim avanim nosan lebenai ve'nekarin shem hektish alein ashet titnela bebinyan. Hilchach lomala gizbar. Say for Rabbi saying, now watch this. Or the other possibility is if somebody is donating the building materials, essentially, again, they donate it, and that's fine. But ultimately, again, the consecration is not made until the structure itself is fully finished. So we'll say, so therefore, what could you have? This is incredible. So what will be a case of ribbis? So we'll say, so now watch this. If halach l'maisa, the Beis HaMikdash has building materials, and the Gizbar chooses to lend it out to someone, and he says, here, you could borrow this stone, you could use these stones or use this wood, again at a rate of, I don't know, $100 a week. It would normally only cost $80 a week. So that's ribbis. That's ribbis. But yet, Rabbi say, what's the halacha? Beis HaMikdash is permitted to charge ribbis. Okay, both say fascinating, no? So both say it's just one of these. This is the beauty of Daf Yomi, I will say, that you pick up like these beautiful morsels, these beautiful nuggets. So now, I never knew this before, that when the Beis HaMikdash builds, the structures themselves do not become Kodesh until they are finished. Otherwise, you're going to get into Me'ilah problems the entire day. So both say, that ends the sugya. So we'll say, see, remember again, how long have we been doing this already, right? So 45 minutes ago, when we started this, how did we start this? What was our shayla? Our shayla was, the Mishnah said, there's no onah by hektish. What about bittul mekach? So as I say, I know that means that halacha l'maisa, if it's a sixth, there's no onah by the mikdash. Mikdash could even charge even by a sixth. What about more than a sixth? Is there bittul mekach or not? So say the Rambam Paskins, get ready for it. There is no bittul mekach. So Rabbi says, so essentially what we really say is like this. The laws of Onah as a whole don't apply to the Beis HaMikdash. So whether the Beis HaMikdash overcharges by less than a sixth, or more than a sixth, it doesn't negate the transaction. So halacha l'maisa, again, essentially, there is no halacha of onah when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash. Right? Obviously, again, how this is all assuming that the Beis HaMikdash is benefiting. If the Beis HaMikdash is the one on the short end of the straw, right? So you always have to make good by the Beis HaMikdash, right? The house always wins, the Beis HaMikdash always wins. But halacha l'maisa, the Beis HaMikdash overcharges by less than a sixth, or more than a sixth. The halachas of onah do not apply to the Beis HaMikdash. That, Rabbi say, is the halacha l'maisa. So that's number one. And number two, we see now how they dealt with building materials by the Beis HaMikdash. Good. So we'll say, let's finish up. The rest of the daf is pretty quick. Let's go. Ein bohem. I think I say that all the time, right? Furthermore, again, I will say, there is no din of kefel. Now, both say, remember again, going through the list, we said these are the things that are not subject to onah, that are also not subject to kefel. What's not subject to kefel? Avadim, shtaros, karkos, and tekteshos. So how do I know this? Here we go. Says the Gemara. How do I know this? Al kol davar pesha klal. So I'll say this is the pasuk by kefel. This is kefal. When do you pay kefal? When you steal something, right? So again, it says, "I'll call davar pesha for any matter of iniquity." Klal. That's a general statement. Al shar, al chamor, al se, al salma. Then it says, for what type of item, if you steal it, would you be chayiv for kefal? For example, an ox, a donkey, a se, a sheep, or a salma. Salma means a garment. Prat. That's a prat. Al kol aveda, for any item that is lost. Asher Yomar, Chazer v'Kala. So we'll say that's another klal. What do you have over here? Klal, uprat, uklal. I have an inclusive statement, a limiting statement, and then another inclusive statement. So we'll say whenever you have a klal, uprat, uklal, that is an exegetical principle. How do you dash in a klal, uprat, uklal? Iyatadan elakena prat. So we'll say in a klal, uprat, uklal, the prat comes to essentially limit the scope or modify, really limit the scope of the klal. So the Gemara says, Ma prat mafurash dara metaltal v'gufa mamon. So we'll say, just like the prat. What's the prat? It's dara metaltal. Number one, it's movable. And number two, it has an inherent value. So therefore, I will say only. So what's subject to the lachs of kefel? Af kol davar hamataltal v'gufa mamon. So I will say, so too, what is subject to the laws of kefel? When do you have to pay a double payment? Only if it conforms to these same criteria. Number one, it's movable. Number two, it's inherently valuable. What does that come to exclude? Here we go. Yatsu karka shemataltalin. So it excludes karka. Why? Karka is not movable. Yatsu avadim shishalaros. It excludes avadim. Why? Because ultimately, again, eved is compared to karka. Yatsu shtaros. It excludes shtaros. Why? Shavabi shemataltalin aim gufa mamon. So I will say it excludes shtar. Why? Because even though shtar is movable, a shtar I will say is what? Shtar I will say is what? Is not inherently valuable. This was the daf of the first day of Yom Tov, I will say. What does a shtar represent? What does the shtar represent? A right to collect. But a shtar in and of itself is not inherently valuable. So the Gemara says, Hegdeshos amakra re'ehu v'lo hekdesh. So we'll say hekdesh in general is excluded. Why? Because what the this psukim is, this applies to re'ehu, to something between you and your friend, and hekdesh is not your friend. Right? Hekdesh is not re'ehu. Hekdesh is not re'ehu. Next, I will say, furthermore, this whole list of items is also not subject to the 4 and 5 time penalty. Right? Now, this is an easy one. My taima, tashlumi dalad vehemrach, one of lo tashlumi shlosh avara. We'll say, remember this from our Bava Kama days. We'll say, arba v'chamisha, the 4 and 5 time penalty payment is always built upon what? Always built upon what? Kefel. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, if you don't have kefel, which we've just established, you don't have arba v'chamisha. Next, shomer chinam eino nishba. So I will say, furthermore, again, I will say, so just to plug this in, a shomer chinam would not swear in these cases. Now I will say, so just to understand, a shomer chinam, unpaid custodian, is chayiv for what? What is he chayiv for? Right? Pshia, for negligence. Right? So halacha l'maisa, pretty much everything else he's going to be pater. Now, as we've already established, when we say that a shomer chinam is pater, what does that mean? It means he has to take a shvur. In other words, he always has to swear. He always still has to swear that he hasn't been a posheya. So like Rashi over here says, Eino nishba, shelo pasha, shelo iskikaso, Torah lishabale. So we'll say, so for any of these items, avadim, shtaros, karkaos, hekdeshos, if these items were deposited with a shomer chinam, and now they're gone, and the shomer chinam says, I'm so sorry, it was an ones, right? Or gneva va'aveda, he doesn't have to swear in order to free himself from liability with these items. So let's just finish this up, then we're going to stop for today. Minan immediately. Where do we know this from? This is the problem with doing daf after davening. I apologize. It just feels like we have all the time in the world. I'm sorry. I just have to be more mindful of this. People have chalam. Unless I'm saving you from something. If I'm saving you from something, feel free to stay as long as you'd want, right? So from where do I know this from? That a shomer chinam does not have to go ahead and take a shavua on these items. The Tanra Banan. Ki yitin ish al re'ehu. Supposed to now watch this. The pasuk over here is also talking about kefel. So the Gemara says, "Im yitin ish re'ehu kesef al kelim lishmar the gunav mi beis ha'ish im yimatzeganav yishalim shnayim." So ultimately, this was talking about shmira. So watch this. Ki yitin ish re'ehu klal. So we'll say if a person will give something to his friend to watch. So ultimately, again, a klal, general statement. So the Gemara says kesef al kelim. Then it says either money or utensils. Prat. This is specific. The guna of mi beis ha'ish, and then it was stolen. Chazer v'kalal. Klal uprat uklal. So we'll say once again have a klal uprat uklal. That was whenever you have a klal uprat uklal, iyatadan elakina prat. So we'll say again, with the klal uprat uklal, so the klal is always defined by the prat. Ma prat mefurash tara metalta v'gufa mamon. So we'll say just like the prat is something that is inherently valuable and is movable and inherently valuable. Af kol davar hamatalta v'gufa mamon. So to say, where does this halacha apply? That the shomer has to take a shavua to anything that is movable and inherently valuable. Therefore, Yatsa Karko Shenim Metaltalin, it excludes karka that is not movable. Yatsa Avadim Shikshul Karkos, it excludes Avadim that are compared to karka. Yatsu Shtaros, it excludes Shtaros, Shafa Bisham Metaltalin, Ein Gufan Mamon. And ultimately it excludes Shtaros. Why? Because even though Shtar is movable, a Shtar does not possess inherent value. What about Hekdeshos? Hekdeshos, Omakra Re'ehu, Re'ehu Veloshal Hekdesh. Once again, I will say the Torah uses Lashon of Re'ehu. Re'ehu means your fellow and not Hekdesh. Therefore, Allah Lamaisa, the Shomer Chinam will be exempted from swearing regarding all of these items. All right, fine. One more piece and then we'll stop. Then we're really going to stop. No says, let's just finish up. It's nice to finish a whole block. No is part of our Simchas Yom Tov. No says, Schar Eino Mishalei. So the no say schar ultimately again also. Actually, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up. Kept you long enough. We'll pick up. We'll say tremendous. Ein simchas yom tov gedola mizo. We'll say again. So we emerged with an important piece of halacha about ein onal hektish. We also emerged with a very important piece of halacha ultimately regarding how the Beis Hamikdash consecrates building materials. Shkayach. Have a good night, everyone. Same time tomorrow. All right, Chavra on Zoom. A good night, everyone. Moadim l'simcha. Good to see everyone. How are you?